I don't bite. Unless you're cute and single. Gather around. Welcome everyone to the Salem Jail. My name is Reverend Peter White. I will be your tour guide. I'm an ordained Wiccan minister and practicing wizard, or if you prefer, witch here in Salem. So now you can come back wherever you're from. Check off Met Salem Witch. Done. Making things happen for you folks. So yes, of course, we are going to talk about the witch trial hysteria of 1692. We're going to talk about some murders and curses and all that fun stuff associated with the hysteria. As you would think, related to a ghost story. However, we're going to also talk about some other aspects of Salem's history. It does not get talked about much, but quite frankly, it gets steamrolled by the hysteria. For example, this is Essex Street. If we walked about 20 minutes down this way, turn to our left, we'll be facing a mansion to this day still called the Parker Brothers Mansion. And Parker Brothers means the game company. Kurt, who said they got games over here? Yep. 2 gold stars for these ladies right here. Parker Brothers, the game company. 2 brothers called the Parker Brothers. It's the very town they founded their company in. Now, while that's all fine and dandy, as this lady in the Syracuse sweatshirt is probably thinking to herself, well, that's all interesting trivia, Reverend Peter. What does that have to do with the ghost tour? I'm glad you asked me that. Let me explain this to you. The reason we're going to talk about the Parker Brothers a little bit is because the Parker Brothers did not invent the most popular games, like Monopoly. They bought the rights. Okay. They bought the rights to it. Now, when they bought the rights to it, while they liked the concept, didn't like the execution. So they looked out their window, looked at their own hometown, and used it for inspiration to modify these games to make them more broadly appealing. And we're going to see how the Parker Brothers included famous haunted sites and murder sites into their games. So we're going to see some very interesting crossover on that level. We're also going to talk a little bit about pirates. On a scale of 1 to 10, that was about a 4. Let's try that again. Pirates! Hey! All right, that was an 8-ish. I'll give you an 8-ish. That's a silver star for you folks. We're going to get to a gold, don't worry. Now, why in Blue Blazers are we talking about pirates? Excellent question, lady with the brown scarf. Let me explain this to you. The reason we're going to talk a little bit about pirates is because up until about 1800, the presidency of Thomas Jefferson, this was the #1 maritime port of the Northeast. Have you folks been by the waterfront today?
Yes.
No? For those of you who have not, sir, just imagine a bay. It looks like any other bay. But nonetheless, for you those who have, imagine on average 300 ships coming and leaving a harbor a day. This was, as I said, the #1 maritime port of the Northeast. Now, when you're on back in the day, very large port, a lot of trade. A lot of trade makes a lot of money. And that naturally attracted pirates. Another gold star right there. Yes! And that is how Salem became the unofficial pirate capital of the Northeast as well. So we're going to talk about some very interesting, nefarious things that happened literally under our feet. Pirate tunnels, or more commonly referred to as smuggler tunnels, that interlink many of these buildings in the downtown area, and some of these tunnels used to go all the way to the waterfront. So we're going to talk about some nefarious uses of these tunnels, as well as a associated alleged haunting with them. So we're going to talk a pretty broad spectrum of Salem's history, not just the trials. All right. Now, some of you might have already been here. This is a witch trial memorial. 10 stone benches on each side, representing the 20 victims associated with the hysteria. All the benches have the names, dates, and mode of execution on them. Now, before we talk about the hysteria in detail, we need to talk about some misconceptions that I like to dispel so we all start on the same page, historically speaking. Now, first, no, none of these accused and executed that are represented by this memorial are buried here. In fact, they are buried nowhere. According to Puritan belief, if you are accused or convicted of the crime of witchcraft, you do not deserve a burial. Once you were hung until dead, you were cut down, where your body fell, that's where it remained, exposed to the elements and wild animals. So they couldn't be buried here because they were buried nowhere to begin with. Second, hanging, exclusive mode of execution by the Puritans. Why is that, Reverend Peter? Because the Puritans saw what was going on in Europe, saw the burning to death, the quartering, the drowning, all these horrendous ways they were executing alleged witches. So the Puritans thought that was barbaric. That was beneath them. They said, well, if we hang these people, they fall down, the neck snaps, relatively quick, relatively painless. So they're actually trying to be nice in killing them. And we'll understand why this is a little later on when we talk in detail the roots of the hysteria, and then you'll really understand why they were actually trying to be a lot nicer than what was going on in Europe. Finally, what is the biggest historical impact of the hysteria that affects us today as a country? Anyone in or going to be taking U.S. history class soon? Yes. Listen up and amaze your teacher. In the fall of 1692, the hysteria only lasted during the summer and fall of 1692, FYI. In the fall of 1692, Governor Phelps, the governor of Massachusetts colony of the time, comes back from a trip from New Hampshire, comes back to Boston, crosses the threshold to see his wife, who hasn't seen in a bit, and she's standing there waiting for him to inform him that she has been accused of the crime of witchcraft by some gossiping ladies up here in Salem. And the governor finally says, enough. This witch court has spiraled out of control. I'm shutting it down. And the Puritan church, which was running the witch court, said, I'm sorry, governor. We're in charge, not you. We'll let you know when we're done. And the governor said, excuse me? I'm the head of state appointed by the king. I'm in charge of this colony, not you. And the Puritan church, in essence, said tough. Not the answer the good governor wanted. Thankfully, he had some backbone. He stood up, sent his men up here to make a long story short, forcibly shut the trials down. Now, what does that have to do with us today, or historically the big picture? It is the very first instance in the New World of a separation of church versus state fight. It is this instance that inspired our founding fathers a generation later, specifically Thomas Jefferson, who wrote that he studied the hysteria, he saw how dangerous it is when one overlapped the other, and this is what got him and many of the other founding fathers on the bandwagon of separation of church and state, which is arguably the cornerstone of our secular country today. So the hysteria has very broad implications to us as a country and a people. Now, this graveyard, second oldest colonial graveyard in America, so that usually bodes the question.
What's the first?
A lot of gold stars. Yes, excellent question. And the answer is, lady in the red coat. No. Now why does Reverend Peter, who apparently knows a lot of history, not know that? Is because there are 12 different graveyards claiming to be the oldest. 11 of them up and down the East Coast, and the 12th one in, wait for it, Ohio. Exactly what I said when I was told this. Yes, please don't ask me. I don't know. So, Salemites, you've been around the block a few times. We're like, well, no one's claiming to be the second oldest. We're number 2. Woohoo! And that's how we became the second oldest colonial graveyard in America. Everyone else wants to fight for first place. Now, if we look at these headstones, we see two sizes more or less, pretty large and pretty small. Does anyone know what the small headstones represent? No, they are not children. No, they are not pets. No, they are not women. No, most of them are not footstones. Who said that over here? Poor, ding, ding, ding. Poor people. In this now, what I'm about to, the little bit of a story I'm about to tell you really applies to you ladies. So I would suggest you really listen up to this. In the 16th, 17th, 18th century, if you died, you did not have money for a proper burial. The undertaker would wrap your body up, put it in storage, and put a notice in the local paper, hoping a kind friend or relative would come forward, pony up the money for a proper burial. If no one came forward, after a few days, then you got the pauper or poor person's burial. Smallest piece of stone they felt like chiseling, maybe the year of your death, maybe your initials, the cheapest box, boom, that was your burial. Now the undertakers created a term for this whole process. When they put your body aside, hoping someone to pay for it and claim it, they called it the layaway. Exactly where we get it today, except picking up dead Aunt Millie, you're picking up a cashmere sweater. Now, if we look over here to my left, beyond the creepy graveyard, we see a creepy white house. Kind of looks like the Bates Motel. Those of you under 21 probably have no idea what that means. Now, if you look at the creepy white house, are we all familiar with Nathaniel Hawthorne?
Yes.
Famous writer, House of Seven Gables, Scarlet Letter, Night with Reverend Harris, came here from Salem and actually hated this town. Yes, him. Now, Nathaniel Hawthorne writes, he came over to visit his wife's family, as they were the original owners of this house. Came over to visit one evening, made himself in the downstairs sitting room by the fireplace, while her family was upstairs preparing to join him. While he waited, he writes a full-body male apparition spirit, walked through this graveyard, through the wall, into the sitting room, sat down next to him in the empty chair. He had a nice 2 or 3 minute chat with the spirit. The spirit then got up, wished him well, walked back through the wall, back into the graveyard. Nathaniel writes this as a factual experience. Because of all the cameras, I'm assuming we're taking pictures tonight.
Yes.
Excellent. Now, if any of us have been to our website, salemghosttours.com, you've probably seen hundreds, if not thousands of photos people have submitted to us over the past 6 or 7 years we've been doing this tour. Many of them have come from this graveyard. People have gotten everything from unexplained orbs to shadow figures to the mist phenomena. People have some really amazing alleged evidence. So if you want to take the pictures, I certainly encourage it. Let me also say, this is a one-stop, consistently, electronic equipment seems to fail. I wish I had $1 every time someone told me that I just left the hotel and charged my camera, I've taken one picture and now the battery's dead. Or my cell phone won't turn on. Or something along those lines. That seems to happen on a fairly consistent basis. If that does happen to you, take it as a personal experience. Any questions, I'll be happy to. We'll get going in just a moment. Look, everyone, it's the haunted laundromat. Wow. No one wants to talk about the haunted laundromat.
Is he the one that's
That girl let down. But we see this brick building down here on the left-hand side of the street with the lights up front and the light on the side here. Now, if you notice, the support wall on the far side of the parking lot, support wall of the graveyard, runs right literally behind that building. It literally does abut the back of the building. Now, the story I'm about to tell you, I know for a fact happened because A, I actually spoke to the bartender who was on duty that night, and she told me this is exactly, she verified this story with me personally. And second, Tim, who most of you probably bought tickets from today behind the counter, he actually talked to the owner of this building at the time the story happened, about 15 years ago, and he actually showed Tim photos of what I'm about to tell you. So we know for a fact, even though it sounds unreal, that this actually happened. Now, as far as what happened, as I said, about 15 so years ago, the bartender in question that I spoke to, as well as a couple other waitresses, it was after last call. All the people had left for the night, and they were cleaning up, preparing for the following day. While they cleaned up, that back wall is actually the wall just beyond the bar. And she says she was cleaning up the bar, and she heard it start making a really weird cracking sound. She didn't think too much of it. She kept cleaning the bar, and the waitress was, restocking, whatnot. And she goes, all of a sudden, the stone wall just crumbled and collapsed inward. All the stone fell in, and a bunch of dirt from the graveyard poured into the bar area. And two partial grave remains stuck out. And these were graves that are just behind the building. Now, ever since that happened, for the past 15 or so years, employees have been reporting some very odd occurrences here. Everything from hearing talking and whispers around corners and go to see who it is and there's no one there, to footsteps up and down the staircase and in the upstairs event hall. In fact, I talked to a former waitress here, and she definitely told me that she hated going upstairs to the event hall when it wasn't in use because she constantly felt she kept seeing things. So very interesting, very odd. This only happened after that wall collapsed. Now, if you go into the bar area, it's now a place called Murphy's. If you go into Murphy's now and look at the wall behind the far wall behind the bar, you'll notice that wall looks fairly newer than the rest of the supporting walls. That is because it is. They had to replace that entire back wall. Sam Adams, if you look at the statue of Sam Adams, it's a very statuesque, no pun intended, man, just standing there kind of like this, right? And if you look on my favorite bottle of Sam Adams, it's a pretty nice looking guy, kind of like that. That is not Sam Adams. That is actually loosely based on Paul Revere, both the statue and pretty much all the modern paintings and artist work of Samuel Adams. Why is that? Samuel Adams had a touch of polio. He was actually kind of hunched over and kind of doing a little bit of Hunchback of Notre Dame a little bit. Not to that degree, but we kind of get not the nicest looking guy in the world. Also, Sam Adams had an issue with personal hygiene. He took maybe one bath a month, and he, for whatever reason, did not believe in laundry. In fact, some of the other founding fathers actually wrote about almost literally having to hold Sam Adams down and getting him to put on a clean pair of clothing to meet the French ambassador. But what Sam Adams perhaps lacked in personal hygiene and looks, he made up for in brilliant diplomat and politician, and that's why we revere Sam Adams today, even though he certainly wasn't a poster child, and hence why none of the statues or pictures of him are really him. Because Paul Revere, he was a good-looking guy. Now, why are we standing here, Reverend Peter? Excellent question, lady with the red scarf. Let me explain this to you. If you look at a map of Salem from about 200 years ago and today, you're going to see that actually Salem is about 50% landmass larger. The reason being, over generations, Salemites were filling in the saltwater marshes, the inlets to the ocean, and in fact, an entire river ultimately got filled in. 1699, when my story takes place, right about where my friend with the red scarf here is standing, going that away, used to be an inlet to the ocean. A lot of Salem going that away is actually filled. Now, 1699, a dock going out about 100 feet this way, where ships would come and trade and whatnot. Now, this is called Front Street because this used to be part of the waterfront. Now, in 1699, a ship from England docked here in Salem. It was filled with cannons, gunpowder, and ammunition. Its mission was to go up and down the Salem and Boston coast and distribute these supplies to all the forts to restock and resupply them. The captain had just come almost a month's journey across the Atlantic, and he needed to restock his own ship. So he came here, being a big port, as we already talked about, came here to Salem to do just that. And he thought, give his crew a day or two to stretch their legs. Now, sailors, cooped up in a ship for almost a month, they get to a major port and take a wild guess what they decide to do. Drink, party, and some other things. Now, trying to really try to keep this PG. Now, with all that said, one of the sailors, in his inebriated state, tells his friends at the bar, you know what would be a really cool idea? If I go back on the ship, I set up one of these brand new cannons and I fire it into the harbor. Fireworks, woohoo! So he just does that. he stumbles down here, stumbles back on the ship, sets up one of these brand new cannons, and fires it into the harbor. Unfortunately, the one cannon he chose to set up was an effective one. The cannon explodes, which sets off the ammunition, which sets off the gunpowder. The entire ship, the entire dock, and the entire front area of the pier goes up in a literal fireball. 24 people were killed instantly in the explosion. Another dozen lost various arms and legs, exactly where you're standing now. We're going to talk about the Nathaniel Hawthorne building, which is now Salem Restaurant. It's one of my other, no pun intended, haunts. Before I talk about exactly what happens here, we're going to talk a little bit about one of my favorite topics, pirates! That's about a 6.5. Pirates! Yeah! There we go. Now we're cooking. Yes. Now, why are we talking about pirates? Because this has one of the few remaining entrances to what were in their basement, to what remains of the smuggler, or if you will, pirate tunnels. Now, let me talk a little bit so we can put everything into context. The story I'm about to tell you. Let me talk a little bit about the history. Now, these tunnels, as the name implies, used for easily and simply enough smuggling. Cotton, tobacco, and such products that back in the day they would want to smuggle in to get around taxes and tariffs. Also, during Prohibition, alcohol. However, these tunnels were used for even more nefarious purposes. The slave trade. Now, if those of you who are real history buffs, you're thinking to yourself right now, well, why before the Civil War, why did Massachusetts have to smuggle slaves in? Everyone was doing slavery. All contraire, mon frere. No. Massachusetts, being the bluest of blue state, the most liberal, we actually outlawed slavery a generation before the Civil War. To us, the Civil War was almost a moot point. So the sea captains here, however, did not want to miss out on, back to our good topic,
Pirate.
and so they... You're my new BFF now. They use these tunnels to smuggle in and out slaves. Because, as we said, they didn't want to miss out on the money. And that's why they had to use these tunnels for that purpose. Now, when I say the word slaves, generally speaking, who do we think of as the slaves? Africans, Haitians, West Indies, all valid, completely correct answers. Dirty little historical American secret. And once again, for you people who are or going to be taking U.S. history class, listen up to impress your teacher with this little tidbit. Until about 1800, for every African, Haitian, and such that came into the colonies as a slave, 3 Native Americans got sold into slavery going out. That ratio of 3 to 1 did not flip until about 1800. By the end of the slave trade, historians estimate, depending on which historian you talk to, anywhere from 35 to 65,000 Native Americans were sold into slavery going out to various parts of Asia and Europe. So the slave trade, which they don't really talk about much in U.S. history class, was a two-way street, coming in and going out. Now, with all that said, and as we all know from history class or even watching the History Channel, we know the slaves were really not kept in very good conditions. Many died on their journey, including these tunnels. Unfortunately, these tunnels were even used for even more nefarious purposes. They were used for something I like to call, or used rather, as a problem solver. Sir, my mistress.
Yes.
It's about 1800. My mistress, she's starting to run her mouth a little bit. Starting to tell people about our arrangement. That's what caused me a lot of embarrassment in this town, isn't it?
Yes.
probably going to get kicked out of my congregation, probably lose my job, or if I'm a business, people are going to blacklist me from doing business with me. I'm essentially probably going to get run out of town. So that doesn't make me happy now, does it? No. So I'm going to come to my pirate friend here, slip you a bag of silver, and next thing I know, my mistress is going to be in these tunnels with a bullet in the back of her head. My business partner now, sir. I found out my business partner here, sticky fingers with the profits. That upsets me, doesn't it?
Yes.
We can't have that.
No.
He's a bad man for stealing from the company.
Yes.
So I'm going to give you another bag of silver. And guess what's going to happen to him?
Take him out.
Yes! See, you and we. So, problems like that were solved in these tunnels all the time. Now, as far as what's going to happen here in Rockville, as I said, they have one of the few non-sealed up entrances to what remains of the tunnels. One of the two owners and several of the employees have reported seeing what they describe or call the lady in blue. It is a young woman in a Victorian era blue dress, and she is only seen hanging out when they do catch glimpses of her, only hanging out by the entrance to the smuggler tunnels in the basement and nowhere else in the building. I've also talked to some other employees who've had other odd things happen as it relates to the basement. For example, Chrissy, one of the waitresses here, a friend of mine, she said that she was, they were just about to open the doors for brunch. She's walking by the staircase to the tunnels, to the basement. She said, as she's walking by the stairs, she said, I swear to you, Peter, I heard a two-way conversation coming from the basement. She thought, I wonder who else is here. So she went downstairs to go see who else was there, and she said, I ended up standing in the middle of an empty basement. There's absolutely no one else downstairs. Greg, one of the bartenders here, he was telling me he was cleaning up one night. It was after all the patrons had left for the day, or the evening. He's cleaning up, and he goes, I'm cleaning at the bar, and he goes, I swear I heard footsteps starting at the base of the steps from the basement and working their way up to come to the main floor. He goes, so I go around the corner to see who's coming up the staircase behind me, because I turn the corner, and I end up looking at a completely empty staircase. So things like that happen. They've also been reporting seeing shadow figures in the upstairs hall as well. So it's a very interesting phenomenon they've been reporting. Now, historians have done some investigation at this location. They've not really found any type of historical evidence to suggest anything nefarious or tragic has ever happened to a woman in this time period. However, paranormal investigators counter that and said, well, you know what? Back in the day, if I paid my pirate friend to take care of my mistress, I'm probably not going to write about it. You know? Let's see. I owe you to John the Pirate 20 silver, kill mistress. Yep, I'll put that right in the checkbook. Don't call me crazy, but that kind of makes sense to me. So they say most likely. So the paranormal investigators suggest this young woman something nefarious, like some of the examples I gave probably happened to her, and that's why she's only seen by the entrance to the tunnels, and why they haven't really found any evidence to suggest anything. Because if you're going to pay a pirate friend to take care of a problem, you're not going to announce it to the local paper. So if you guys want to take some pictures, feel free. We'll get going in just a second.
What was the building before? Do we know?
This building? Yeah, the reason it's called. Very quickly, the reason it calls the Nathaniel Hawthorne building, he was a jeweler and silversmith, and we actually, and I really don't get time in the tour to talk about this, but actually, if it wasn't for Daniel Lowe, most likely you guys would not be here. He actually started the whole tourist thing in Salem. He was a jeweler in the late 1800s, and Salem, as I alluded to about the old families in Salem not wanting to talk about their family participating in the witch trials and piracy and all the black stuff, dark stuff they were involved in, no one wanted to talk about it, deal with it, acknowledge it even happened, specifically the trials. Well, Daniel had no such lineage here. So he said, you know what? You know, this whole witch thing, quite frankly, as a good businessman, there's a buck to be made. So he crafted these silver witch spoons. It was a silver teaspoon, and at the end of the handle was a witch on a broom. And he just thought, you know, I'll sell these and, you know, a little touristy thing. Well, he ended up selling thousands upon thousands of them. In fact, history says, or at least alleges, Sears and Roebuck was the first mass catalog here in the United States. Wrong. Daniel Lowe beat Sears and Roebuck by 3 years. He actually had the first mass mail order catalog in the United States. And he put these little silver spoons in as one of the items. And they sell like hotcakes. And thousands of people bought them via mail order, and it brought thousands of people into Salem every year to seeking out these silver witch spoons.
Are any of the original ones here? Do they still have them?
Not that I know of. They're in collectors, but but I do not know anyone locally that, I mean, there might be some old family might have one on their wall somewhere, but they certainly don't announce it if they do. But he sold thousands of these, and that's actually what started to change the mentality of the town of, we shouldn't talk about the witch trials, we shouldn't talk about this and that, because they were simply just embarrassed by it, to, you know, the maritime trades collapsing, you know, we really need something else to sustain us. And, you know, the vaudeville acts aren't going to be around forever that was sustaining the town after the maritime trade. And they said, you know, and so they realized there's a lot of history here. And while we might not be as big as Boston, there's still a tremendous amount of history here that can attract people. And it's because of him, he actually kind of started opening that path to Salem. Yes, the top floor used to be the first church of Salem. All right, folks, let's go this way. Who here hasn't heard the story about how the hysteria started? Let's put it this way. Who's not heard about it?
Me.
Has not. Okay, enough for you, so Cliff Note version time. Now, what started the hysteria? Very simple. The Puritans came over here to found Salem for two reasons. First, they were butting heads and became essentially arch nemesis with the Church of England. The Church of England and the Puritans had reached the animosity, reached a fever pitch. The second reason was the Age of Reason, or the Enlightenment movement had started sweeping Europe. What is the Enlightenment movement? To make a very complicated topic short, it was very simply the philosophy of separating science and religion. Before the Enlightenment period, if your wonderful wife here got ill, it would have been attributed, explained in a religious context. There's demons infecting her, there are witches or wizards cursing her, so on and so forth. After the Enlightenment period, if she got sick, it's a thing called a virus. Probably why she's sick. And that's essentially what the Enlightenment period did, make a very complicated topic short. Now, with all that said, they wanted nothing to do with the science stuff, all nonsense, we want nothing to do with it. They came over here, founded Salem, 1626, to create their own little utopia, their own perfect little society in their view. Now the Puritans, while technically Christians, today will be considered extremists. They were very extreme and very conservative in their views and interpretation of their religion and beliefs. For example, sir, 1692, this poor guy, he's going to be so sleeping on the couch. In 1692, if she talked back to you and you were Puritans, that was a crime. You could have brought it to the magistrate. She would have been found guilty because clearly a man's word's worth more than a woman. Clearly. Yeah. She would have then be brought to the town square, strapped up, and given 10 or 20 cat o' nine lashes across the back. And that's just for talking back to you. That is how extreme and literal they interpreted their religion. Now, so everything was hunky-dory here until the mid-1600s. The mid-1600s, some Enlightenment congregations and preachers started setting up shop here in Salem. And the Puritans are like, what are you people doing? We left England to get away from you and now you're following us. Kick them in the shin. So, Fast forward summer of 1692. Now, by this point, Salem is already on edge. A smallpox epidemic had just swept the area. And as we already established, they interpreted that as there must be witches or demons or Satan or some crazy nonsense causing this. So they're already on edge for that. So a prominent doctor's family who had a slave maid from Haiti called Tituba. Tituba practiced today, or more or less, we would call voodoo. And being not only cook and cleaning, she's also the nanny of the household. And by how her own beliefs and practices was, you pass on your skills and knowledge to the younger children that you took care of. So she starts teaching the young children a form of divination, or fortune telling, called scrying. It's her form of it was getting a bowl of water, cracking a raw egg in it, and how the egg moved. She alleges you could foretell the future. While the children get caught practicing this. Now, divination is technically one of the skills under the umbrella of witchcraft. Not happy. So then the girls start acting oddly just as they get caught with their hands in the cookie jar. Now, it's written they were having fits and going into trances and speaking in tongues and all this stuff. Now, what was happening to the young girls? Back in this time period, one of the main staples of food was the grain rye. They basically made all their bread products out of rye. The proper conditions, a fungus called ergot can grow on rye bread and survive the baking process. Now, what happens if you ingest enough ergot and get ergot poisoning? It has the same effect as LSD. So these children were high. They didn't understand how to interpret that, so they attributed, like they always do, to something spiritual, religious. Oh, there are witches now. First they cursed us with disease, and now they're cursing our children. And that was essentially the spark that set off the powder keg. And the finger pointing began, because young children, especially young girls who don't want to get in trouble, they do what all young girls would do. My neighbor made me do it. And they just happen to point fingers at the neighbors they never got along with to begin with. Imagine that. Now, some of the other Puritans start seeing this. They go, we've been finding a way, we've been meaning to get a way to shut up all these Enlightenment preachers, outspoken Enlightenment congregation members. Well, what's these little girls kind of have the right idea, so what's the easiest way to do it? I think you're a witch. Now, just to make my point, we went back to the memorial with the 20 stone benches representing the 20 victims. The one historic variable all 20 of them have in common, they all attended Enlightenment congregations, listened to Enlightenment preachers, and most of them owned a lot of land. Why is that important? Because if I did accuse this man of witchcraft, and he did get convicted, depending on who I was, either I or the Puritan Church got his land. And back then, land meant
Money.
I told you we're going to keep going back to that topic. And that, my friends, is what the hysterion's really about. Have anything to do with witches? No. That was smoke and mirrors for the real reason. Political and religious infighting and a land grab in that order. Now, with all that said, why are we standing here? Bridget Bishop, first person executed during the hysteria, 40-year-old woman. She outlived 3 of her husbands, and she basically spat in the face of the Puritans, potentially literally, but definitely figuratively. She basically always mocked them, didn't make a lot of friends in town because of this, because there are obviously a lot more Puritans than non-Puritans. So when the finger pointing began, and the people they want to get rid of, Bridget Bishop owns this piece of land we're standing on, outspoken Enlightenment congregation member, defiant of the Puritan beliefs, so she must be a witch. Now, in 1692, if we were standing here, we'd literally be standing in the middle of her apple orchard, and according to local lore, if you walk through here, piece of land, on the date of her death, you can still smell apples. Let's go over here and talk about where our house used to be. This is the location of where Bridget Bishop's house used to be. This is not the actual building, but this is the location. Now, this is the Lyceum Restaurant. Any of you guys watch Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventurers?
Yes.
You've probably seen this building featured on it. It was on Ghost Hunters about 4 years ago in one of their October episodes. Ghost Adventurers was here a year ago last spring. Now, they caught some interesting phenomena, voices, EVPs, heard some noises, and many locals and ex-workers here have reported all sorts of strange phenomena too. Now, I personally spoke to a former cook here. At this point, she had just quit her job, and I asked her. I said, you see ghost hunters, you see ghost adventures, you hear all these rumors all around town. You work there. What can you tell me factually, as someone who's worked there for a while? Can you separate the fact and fiction for me? And she said she personally experienced lights turning off by themselves, doors shutting by themselves, hearing whispers around corner, going there to see who is there, no one, and there being no one there, and objects moving by themselves. In fact, she said, not the only reason, but one of the reasons she quit her job is because of the paranormal activity she kept encountering. So you can take that as you will. Now, interestingly enough, a couple years ago, some local witches had a Halloween event here. A professional photographer was hired. Now, the event was 21 plus because it was an open bar. Lyceum does not want to lose their liquor license, so they're strictly enforcing 21 plus. The photographer, after she went home, she developed these photos she took of the event, and she came across several odd pictures with some anomalies she couldn't explain. One of them was a young girl, about 6 or 7. She had shoulder-length curly hair, period dress. She kind of fades out beyond the knees, and you could actually, her upper body, she's translucent. You could actually see the floor and a table behind her. Second photo was some people eating and drinking at a table, one of the banquet tables, and across the far end of the table is an empty chair. When she developed the photo, in the empty chair was a fully formed shadow figure sitting there as if joining these people for conversation and drink. Very, very amazing. If you go in the, when we get back to the store, if you want to see it, we have the picture of the little girl. We don't have all the photos though. If you want to see all the photos, if you're here tomorrow, right next door to us, Crowhaven Corner, the oldest witch store in Salem, they were actually one of the hosts of this event, and they actually have all these photos framed on their wall. So if you want to see it tomorrow, that's right next door to us, that creepy dark brown house. So whether you want to believe this has anything to do with Bridget or not, I'll leave that up to you, but certainly we feel there's something going on here. So if you want to take some pictures, we could go in just a second. Now 1692, this parking lot used to be the town square. This is where the marketplace would be, and the whipping post for all the wives who would talk back to their husbands. Now, if we look at the end of the street, at the end of the T intersection, we see some yellow buildings. Those condos. That was the original location of the Parker Brothers factories and offices. Now, if we look beyond the haunted bingo sign, that creepy gray building, old Salem Jail, opened during the War of 1812, finally shut down 1991. Oldest continuously run federal prison in U.S. history. The cells, 3.5 by 6 feet, roughly. 2 to 4 people per cell. At no time did any of the cells have plumbing. If you're wondering, buckets. Yes, ma'am, up until 1991, because I know that's what you were thinking. The jail held POWs from the War of 1812, the Civil War, and in fact held the Boston Strangler for a little while. The far right wing of the jail is cafeteria. In the middle of the cafeteria was a hangman's platform. Throughout the 1800s, a approximately a half a dozen people were sentenced to death by the warden for crimes committed while incarcerated, and most likely they were executed while other inmates ate around them. Starting about 1840, the first documented paranormal activity happened here in the form of guard reports, interestingly enough. We've actually researched this place, looked in the archives, and we've uncovered hundreds, not thousands, of handwritten guard reports. As I said, starting around 1840, talking about all sorts of activity. Everything from cell doors slamming shut by themselves, to seeing shadow figures in the catwalks above them, to hearing screaming and running around corners, going around to see what's there and there's no one there, to apparitions disappearing before their eyes. In fact, it is documented several guards over the years would refuse to do cell check on certain cells at night because of the apparitions they kept seeing at these locations, and cell 33 became infamous for this. Now, obviously, it is no longer a condemned haunted jail. What does Salem do with the condemned haunted jail? We turn it into apartments. Now, before someone asks me, because I know you're thinking about this man, have I talked to anyone who lives there now? Isn't that what you're thinking?
Yes.
Yes. I've actually talked to 4 tenants over the past couple of years. 2 tenants told me nothing odd or unusual has happened to them since they moved in. The other 2 told me it's a big box of crazy. And one of the 2 who told me it's a big box of crazy, the gentleman in fact looked me right in the face and said, I'm probably not going to renew my lease. Bless you. Interesting side note. Last summer, the leasing office of this complex terminated their short-term leasing program. They now only offer long-term leasing. Take that as you will. Now, the Parker brothers, when they bought the rights to the monopoly, one of the things they did not like about it was the challenge factor. They didn't think it was going to be challenging enough for the mass market. So they happened to look out their window one day, what they see? And there's the inspiration for the jail space on the Monopoly board. Just to make my point, where on the Monopoly board is the jail space located? Corner. And where's this jail? Corner of the T intersection. You guys want to take some pictures? Feel free. And we'll get going in just a second. Philip England. Oh, I'm going to stand on this wall even though they yell at me when I do. Philip English, 1692, big landowner. Now this landowner was while he was loyal to the Puritan Church, he was very scared because he was afraid it was only a matter of time before someone pointed at him to make a run for his land. So he came up with a foolproof plan. If I leave Salem, I can't be accused, plus I can't go to trial, thus I don't lose my land. That makes sense, doesn't it? Kind of. So, in the middle of the night, he gets his wife, gets his child, heads to what is upstate New York. Lays low for a whole year. Comes back to Salem, thinking he outsmarted everyone, to find out the Puritan Church had divvied up and given away most of his land anyway. And left him with just a few small parcels of land. This is one of them, and they had already turned this into a Puritan graveyard. Philip English, less than happy. He secretly, a few years after that, changed his will. A few years after that, he passed on. They opened up his will to discover he deeded this piece of land to the Church of England. The arch enemies of the Puritan move in, set up shop right in the middle of Puritanville, just to... Now, the Church of England, which is now today's Episcopal Church, the original church was wood. Lasted a little over 100 years, got torn down. Eventually, the more permanent stone one was built. But then they said, let's go bigger, because bigger is always better. So they lifted up a bunch of headstones and built over it. Then they said, hey, we need a nice little park. Let's lift up some more headstones and plant trees and make it pretty. And then finally, these horseless carriages, or automobiles, were invented. And clearly, if you have automobiles, you need a parking lot. Let's lift up the rest of the headstones, gravel over it, turn it into a parking lot. Having figured this out already, they lifted up all the headstones. They did not move the bodies. According to local historians, there's an estimated 480 unmarked bodies in this piece of land here. People have gotten some very interesting photos. The most common phenomena has been shadow figures. Feel free to take your pictures. We'll get going to our grand finale in a moment. Now, some of those headstones we passed as we went around the corner, those were some of the headstones that were back here. I got all that. We love tourists. You guys, little fact, second biggest industry here in Salem. We were talking about Daniel Lowe, how he started the whole tourism industry. Second biggest industry in Salem. On average, you guys dump almost $100 million in our local economy every year. We're talking about this mansion right here. In the late 1820s, Captain Joseph White, maritime captain, lived there, owned a big estate, very wealthy, owned a large shipping company. Now, Captain White, while very respected and admired for his accomplishments, he opened up one of the first maritime captains here in Salem to open up the trade routes to Asia. Not very well liked, very bitter man, very paranoid man. In fact, his bedroom, second floor left side, he actually had an iron chest by his bed filled with gold coins, as he was very apprehensive about keeping a lot of his wealth in the bank, and his will. Speaking of his will, he used his will as a weapon, mainly with family members. He'd say, listen, you don't change your tune about this, out of the will. And he'd use his will as a weapon to get his way with family members. Now, in the late 1820s, his great-grandniece lived here with him, and she ended up getting engaged into the Knapp family, getting engaged to one of the two brothers. Now, the Knapp family was a rival merchant company. Captain White, so, pulled out his ace, and said, listen, Missy, you better break off this engagement or out of the will. But she stuck to her guns. And she married into the Knapp family anyway. And Captain White did exactly what he said he was going to do, out of the will. A few years goes by, spring of 1830. Captain White is now over 80 years old. The two Knapp brothers who tried to make amends with the captain and got nowhere are now getting desperate. They want to get back at his will, obviously for the payout, but he's holding firm. So he decides, well, we can't do it by hook, we're going to do it by crook. They come up with a plan. If the will disappears and then something happens to the captain, legally, his estate will then be divided equally among all the heirs, including the great-grannies. So they approach a man, and Mr. Richard Crowninshield. Crowninshield, pretty nefarious person himself, made a lot of his money through illegal gambling, loan sharking, things along that line. They approach Crowninshield, tell you what, not only we will take care of any debt you have with our family, we'll give you $1,000, which in 1830, big chunk of change, to take care of this little Captain White issue we have. So he agreed. So the next night, he snuck in the far left side window in the kitchen, worked his way up to the bedroom, snuck into the captain's bedroom while he slept, pried open the iron chest, took the will, closed the chest to make it look like nothing was wrong, slipped out the kitchen window. The next night, he took the will and met the two Knapp brothers on Salem Common, the park right over there. Gave them the will. They talked a little bit more, finalized the plan. 3 nights later, Crowninshield snuck in the kitchen window again, worked his way up to the bedroom. This time, He had a machine-lathe-studded club in his hand. Walked over to the sleeping captain, bashed him in the head over a dozen times. Then he took a Scottish dirk or dagger, stabbed the captain in the chest over a dozen times with such force, several ribs broke. He then stuck out the window. The next day, the servants see this horrific scene. They call the local constables. Local constables, under tremendous amount of political pressure. While maybe not loved, Captain White was highly respected, very influential, very wealthy. So there's tremendous amount of pressure for them to solve, at this time, the most horrific murder in Salem's history. After almost 2 weeks, they end up spinning their wheels. Begrudgingly, they send a note down to Boston. They say, please send help. Boston sent several investigators to assist. One of them, you might know the name of, Daniel Webster. This is actually one of his last cases. Webster investigates the crime scene with the other investigators. Right about this time, when Webster and the other investigators get here, a man in the local jail comes forward. Says, I have pertinent information about this murder. However, I'm in jail for a petty theft. If you exonerate me from my current sentence, I'll tell you everything I know. Webster and the other investigators talked about it, and they said, well, he's only in jail for petty theft. What's the worst that we can do at this point? So, they listen to what he has to say. He tells an interesting tale. He says, I was an acquaintance of the Knapp family, and all last month I spent in their mansion as their house guest. And let me tell you some of the conversations I overheard. And he starts talking about, two Knapp brothers talking about the captain and the will. And then he says, and one of these conversations involved a third person, a Mr. Richard Crowninshield. And let me tell you what Crowninshield was talking about doing. The whole plot started to unravel. Crowninshield heard through the grapevine he's now a wanted man. He got a leg up on the constables and got to his house. The constables started closing in on him on his house. He decided he's not getting out of this alive. He got some rope, and they found him hanging in his own front porch. Two Knapp brothers ended up getting prosecuted by Daniel Webster on accessory to commit murder charges. First time in U.S. legal history this was done successfully. Two Knapp brothers ended up hanging on Boston Common. The Knapp brothers are dead, Captain White's dead, Crownenshield's dead. That leaves the great-grandies. So she must have got a piece of the pie, right? Remember I said the captain was paranoid? He left a copy of his will with his lawyer. So the niece, after all that, she got a big, fat nothing. In fact, the captain screwed everybody. When they opened up his will, he left his entire estate, money, mansion, the whole thing, to our good friends at Peabody Essex Museum. So he screwed his whole family. Now, with all that said, on a ghost-related note, second floor left side, the captain's bedroom, above video and film. In fact, you go to our website, you'll see several examples. People have captured an older man looking back at them. Paranormal investigators say it is the good captain. Now, before I let you go, take pictures, let me just say one final thing. So we come full circle. Captain White in the bedroom with the knife. What does that sound like?
Clue.
Just like Monopoly, Parker Brothers did not invent Clue. They bought the rights to it. Just like Monopoly, they used their own hometown for inspiration to make it more broadly appealing. And what better murder to base a murder mystery game on than the most famous in Salem's history? Captain White became Mrs. White. The rope, the club became the lead pipe, the dagger, the kitchen, the foyer, the bedroom. And hence you have the basis for the game Clue. Thank you very much for coming to the Salem Night Tour. I hope you guys had a wonderful time. You still get your 15% off in the store if you haven't done your shopping. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to address them. Thank you so much.